You'll never guess who just finished binge watching Arcane and now wants to jump into a Zaun or Undercity inspired D&D setting. I've been waiting for this moment for 3 years. I do feel like I'm immediately about to regret this decision, but who is it that you're wanting to play as? Jinx? Vi? Harmedinger's pet Poro? Not even close. I'm playing as Imagine Dragons. So yeah, I kinda just finished binge watching Arcane Season 2 and now I'm here. Slightly prepared, incredibly tired, and full of feelings. But for those of you who aren't up to date, don't fret at all. There's no spoilers or covering off anything that happens in the story in this video because I don't want to retell that story. Because you see, I'm a world builder, and the one thing I took away while watching the spectacle that was Arcane was I'd love to throw my players into that world and just see what chaos would ensue, and I kind of think I'm very well equipped to do this because I consider myself a bit of an expert when it comes to the world of Runeterra. And what gives me this self-proclaimed title of expert, you ask? Allow me to set the scene to a much more forgettable part of my life. My League of Legends addiction period. Imagine it's 3:36 AM and you're on your third bowl of instant noodles and your second can of Red Bull. It's also the morning of your major year-long university assessment being due, but you're also in your final promotional game in ranked League of Legends to finally get out of bronze. And the only words you and your close friend and duo partner have said to each other over the course of this endeavor is, come on, one more game. But this is actually your last game because you really can't afford to play another. You've taken off an entire day of work to indulge in this sloth. And then that whimsical sound rings in your ears. A match has been found. You and your duo partner both actually got your lane preferences. Better yet, as you look up your teammates' last few games in Mobalytics, they're all actually decent at the game. There's a slight glimmer of hope here.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
And then, your top laner insta-locks Teemo and intentionally feeds the other team 26 kills because they didn't get mid lane. God, I love this game. So yes, I am a dirty, sweaty, angry League of Legends player and have been all the way back in Season 1, which was 10 years ago. Oh, I hate that. But despite what you may think, it wasn't the constant online abuse that made me enjoy the game, it was actually the lore and world of Runeterra that I was absolutely obsessed with. And in between being cyberbullied by strangers across the world, you actually have a lot of time to read up on the characters that are constantly killing you in every game you play in. It's honestly always been great, and it's good that something like Arcane can actually draw attention to how cool and unique the world is. Like I've already alluded to, all I wanted to do the entire time I was watching Arcane was throw together some kind of one-shot for the Undercity or Piltover and just throw my players into that world and just see what happens. And then I realized I could just do that and build out a way to play in this world, and better yet, share it all with you. So let's just do that. Everything I'm about to cover off on is just my personal loose ramblings of Runeterra lore, Arcane the series, and just my general D&D and GMing experience. So if you have any of your own suggestions or improvements or additions to anything I'm about to talk about, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear about them. Why don't we start off with the most exciting aspect of D&D again, in my perspective, and dive into character creation in the world of Arcane. And we'll start off with the seemingly least interesting, but the most in-depth: humans. I think for this entire section, I'll just kind of loosely put together my thoughts on what the stats of these species will be and subspecies and variants and things like that. It won't be 100% perfect, but just my loose suggestions. I think the base stats for a human in the world of Runeterra don't have to be that much drastically different from a variant human, but where they need to start getting a bit more intricate and in-depth is the region of Runeterra that they come from, because they're vastly different and should give you different perks and specialties and proficiencies that reflect where you're from. So let's go into all of them. Trying to come up with a word which best describes the region that you're coming from. I don't know if it's faction. Maybe it's faction, we'll go with that for now. So let's start with the faction of Piltover, the city of progress. Humans from Piltover are innovators, visionaries, shaped by society steeped in science, commerce, and politics. In my mind, if you are living in Piltover, you probably have an intelligence proficiency and a charisma proficiency, or just boost to those stats, because especially if you're going down the Hextech Academy route of things, you're going to naturally be smarter than most people. And if you're leaning into more of the political, persuasive, just yuck side of Piltover as well, you have to be charismatic and deceptive, or persuasive, or I guess a bit intimidating as well, so those kind of increases by 1 or 2 make the most sense to me. I also think as well, an optional feat, something like Piltover's Ingenuity, means you can get proficiency in using Hextech tools, which is an entire toolset we'll have to come up with, but that just makes sense. And then finally is a nice little bundling gift of wealthy patronage, giving you 25 gold to start things off, because you're from Piltover, of course you're well off, unless you're going down the Victor route and you've risen from... I'm getting ahead of myself, let's just stick to that for now. Then you've got the faction of Zaun. Life in Zaun is a struggle filled with danger, resilience, and cunning. If you're from the Undercity, you thrive in adversity, and have often pushed yourself to the very edge just for survival's sake. I think in terms of ability score modifiers, for the simple fact that you know how to navigate your way through the maze that is the Undercity, you'll get some kind of dexterity boost alongside a constitution boost, because you're gritty, you're living in filth, and you're alive. You deserve constitution boosts. I think as well, on a slightly sadder note, you probably have a faction feature called like Shimmer Affinity, which just means you are resistant to being poisoned and have advantage on poison saving throws because of the widespread use. Doesn't need to be your character, but the widespread use of Shimmer and its effects on the people in the Undercity. And also some kind of, Zaun grit ability, where maybe when you're reduced to 0 hit points, you get 1 for the first time, because you can't knock us down all the way. We're going to get back up and then you can knock us down and we're done. Now for humans from Noxus. Humans from Noxus value strength, ambition, and dominance. I think it goes without saying the primarily ability score modifier you'll get is in strength. It's the most glaringly obvious thing in the world, but you'd also get something in charisma primarily for intimidation purposes, so let's go with those two. You'll also get some kind of martial training, which will just give you proficiency in 1 or 2 different martial-based weapons, because of course you're proficient in weapons, that just makes sense. I also love the idea of having something like Noxian Tenacity, which just means that if you're from Noxus, you have advantages on being frightened, because it doesn't seem like anything would scare them at all. Now, the next thing I'm going to touch on aren't necessarily heavily featured throughout the entirety of Arcane, but they do exist in the world of Runeterra, and it just gives your characters more background or faction options, so I'll rapid fire through these. Now for humans from Shiruma. Humans who hail from Shiruma are adept at surviving in harsh environments and often have an affinity with long lost magic and runes and things of that nature. Because of this deep connection with magic, you'll get ability score modifiers and wisdom, and because of the harsh modifiers that you've surrounded yourself with by living in a desert, you'll get constitution boosts as well. I think it makes sense to just have some kind of desert feature that just gives you overall bonuses, like maybe you're resistant to fire damage because your skin's adapted to being burnt, and you could probably go longer periods of time without rations. I think that makes sense. Also, jumping on the back of the desert feature, you'll probably have proficiency in survival, and because of your affinity with ancient lost knowledge, you'll have proficiency in history as well. Now for the Freljordians. The icy tundras of the Freljord can shape humans into being resilient hunters and fighters and survivors who embrace the harshness of the cold. I think all of the stats to reflect this are really straightforward. You get ability score modifiers in strength and constitution because of course you do. They should also have proficiencies in athletics and survival. You also have resistance to cold damage. In the Freljords, there's also a heavy emphasis on tribes and belonging to a group, so something like some kind of tribal affinity where maybe when one of your allies within 30 feet of you takes some kind of damage type, you get resistance to that damage type once between long rests. I think that's a really cool of tying together that aspect of it. Now for all you pirates out there, let's talk about Bilgewater. The bustling port city of Bilgewater is home to criminals, pirates, and merchants, all who have a deep affinity and desire for gold, freedom, and infamy. In a similar sense to Zaun, if you've emerged from Bilgewater alive, you will have ability score modifiers in dexterity and charisma. 1, to just navigate through the city safely, and 2, to talk your way out of situations or intimidate people in other situations. It's also very scoundrelly to be from this region of Runeterra, so let's make up something called Scoundrel's Instinct, which maybe between long rests gives you a free use of the dash or disengage action, and maybe you get advantage on initiative rolls because you want to get the first hit in. And I don't know if there's enough here yet, but I also like the idea of a risk taker. So maybe when you're rolling saving throws, you can intentionally roll a disadvantage, but add a d6 to it. You know, it's gambling dice on the side of the docks. I like that. I like that aesthetic. The sheer diversity of humanoids presented throughout Arcane and the wider Runeterra as a whole is one of my favorite representations of cultural and species and gender diversity in any fantasy setting that I've seen. It's also another thing that's really prominent in Arcane as a whole is Runeterra seems to kind of strip away and remove the stigmatization of gender and gender norms as a whole, because they're not really prominent in any of the representation of characters and scenarios and settings, which is so fucking refreshing. Now for the best one. Yordles. Now for anyone who has anything negative to say about Yordles at all, I will physically fight you. They are the coolest fantasy species to ever be conceived, and I will not hear otherwise. Stop talking. You have no idea what I'm talking about. Yordles are small furry beings hailing from the spirit rumble. They don't always need to be furry because fizz exists, but they're just woodland representations of little things, and they're just... I love them. Despite their whimsical and cute demeanors, they can and are fierce warriors and brilliant inventors, tinkerers, spellcasters. They do it all. They're so... Gotta calm down, I need some water. In terms of stat blocks, I'm primarily just reflavoring the gnome stat block because it unfortunately just lines up perfectly with everything that I'd give to them modifier wise, so we'll just run through those really quickly. So, Yordle expertise. They gain proficiency in insight and one artesian tool of their choice. It just makes sense. They're very insightful and wise, and they should get proficiency in tools, especially if they're going to be from Piltover. It can be Hextech tools. If not, whatever you want. Take your choice. The world is your Yordle. On a kind of sadder note, I guess they've got Spirit Realm Timelessness, which means they can't die from old age. So they'll outlive all their non-Yordle companions. Kind of grim, but they can still die though. I think that'll do now for Yordles. I mean, there's so much I could talk about, but you have the ability to flavor the physical appearance of your Yordle to be whatever you want, because they are woodland. They're kind of like from the Fey realm, cutesy, super intelligent beings, so yeah, have fun with it. And then you've got mutants. Gross. Very straightforward premise for this one. This is just an overexposure to Chem-tech or Shimmer, or however you want to flavor it, from being in the Undercity. Mutants will often have extra limbs, glowing skin, or unnatural strength. So how do we represent that in ability scores? Very simply, give them more strength. You are also kind of a science experiment in a way, so you would have complete resistance to poison damage because you're already poisoned. I think as a downfall from all of this, you'd probably have negative charisma because people would be outwardly terrified from you, but then intimidation goes up. So maybe it balances out, but I just think you would be not adept in social situations. I like the idea of when you're starting off creating the character, you're gonna pick like some kind of adapted physiology. So maybe you have to pick an option like having an extra limb or gaining dark vision up to 60 feet. I mean, the limb isn't a negative thing because imagine you had a third arm. Imagine all the things you could do. You could not hold 3 swords. That's great. Yeah, so maybe some of the options are that you're going to pick through is gaining additional AC because your skin mutates in a way that you're stronger, gaining an extra limb, gaining extra hit points, dark vision, which everyone has, so why would you pick that? I don't know. There's legs there of building out a fun mutation list that you got to pick through. So I'll cook on that and I'll maybe leave it in the comments if I remember to do it. I think Arcane does an incredible job at representing how overwhelmingly powerful people can be when they've just juiced up on Shimmer. So adding a feature like a Shimmer Surge, which means when you're making a melee attack or maybe a saving throw, you can add an additional D4 to the result as you're juicing your way through dealing more damage, or I guess trying to save yourself as well. And just 2 more very quick options that aren't necessarily represented a lot in Arcane. They are shown a couple of times, but if you want more options, here they are. The Vestaya. I think I've said that right. I've only ever read it and not heard it out loud. So Vestaya, it's one of those two words, and if it's a third one, ignore it. Vestaya are tied to the magical essence of Runeterra, and their appearance and abilities vary based on their ancestral spirit beast, so like a fox or a bird or a tiger. If you're at all familiar with League of Legends, perfect examples of Vestaya are Ahri, Nami, Rengar, Arcane, and Zaun. These are all perfect different blendings of representations of the Vestaya. And just for a little bit of lore, if you want that added bit of context, the dominance of humans over the world of Runeterra has pushed them into hiding in remote villages and tribes, far from those who might wish to exploit them because they have been exploited in the past. They're kind of a slightly complicated one to stat, but the easiest one is to give them an ability score increase and things like dexterity. Also just a boost to their movement speed because they have spirit animals, so maybe it's 35 feet to 40 feet. And then I personally think any other abilities or boosts you need to give to the character will entirely depend on whatever ancestral spirit it is that you take. As an example, if you wanted to play as a feline Vestaya, you could give them bonuses to their agility, double their movement speed, and give them naturally stronger unarmed attacks because they've got claws. I mean, it all just makes sense with their ancestral spirit. Alternatively, perhaps they want to play as a more simian-themed Vestaya and thus get access to an extra limb for weapon wielding or doing whatever your monkey tail wants to do, I guess. It's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it'll be very dependent on what that spirit is. Good news! I finally made a decision on my Vestayan ancestry. Well, that's fantastic. And what decision have you come to? I want to be a descendant of the mighty snail. Okay, so you're slow, sticky, and prone to being stepped on. Sounds about right, actually. Okay, rude, but what unique class abilities will you grant me? Well, for one, you'll get a mucus trail, which gives you permanent disadvantage on stealth checks, but you also get to use a bonus action to retreat into your shell, which will give you plus 10 to your AC, so enjoy that. Just as a tiny add-in that isn't very well thought out, but I just love the aesthetic. Golems are the best representation of this, and me, remember to interlude visuals here to showcase, is Blitzcrank from League of Legends. Just big robotic golemoid-like figures that they're just aesthetically cool and really fit in with Piltover. Golems are sentient constructs brought to life through magic, alchemy, or advanced Hextech engineering. See? Hextech. It just makes sense to have them as an option to play as. They're almost just kind of reskinned warforges in a way, so that's probably the easiest way to look at them. Ability stat increases in constitution and maybe a stat of your choice, and then a naturally stronger armor class because, of course. Also, they are constructed, so advantages on saving throws against being poisoned, immunity to disease, all those kind of things just make sense because they're not living, breathing things. You probably also have advantages on being petrified or paralyzed, and probably because you are magical in nature, you're immune to being polymorphed because you are almost a living spell in a sense. Also, just some quick ones while we're spitballing now. Some kind of integrated tools because you're kind of a robot construct, so it'd be cool to have an inbuilt, like Go-Go Gadget Tinkerer's tools that is just readily available. And then, your heavy frame, you'll have a naturally stronger unarmed attack because if you got a big golem fist swinging down on you, it's going to do more than me punching you. So D6, your strength modifier, I think that makes sense. Whatever you do end up deciding to play as, don't forget to splice in a healthy amount of tragedy into that monstrous backstory of yours because there's a monster inside all of us after all. I don't know why I decided to film this on a day where it feels like it's 30 degrees Celsius outside and I'm wearing a jumper, but we've committed to it now, so wear it for the rest of the recording, you loser. So great. We've got our characters and now you're ready to run rampant in the streets of the Arcane universe. The next question you need to answer is, which streets are you starting your adventure in? Piltover or Zaun? One of the most appealing aspects about the representation of Runeterra in Arcane, at least for me anyway, is the sharp contrast it has between the snobbish regality that is Piltover compared to the grimy, gritty and dark setting that is the Undercity or Zaun. When choosing between Piltover and Zaun as the starting point of your campaign or one-shot or whatever you're trying to run, the thematic difference comes down to tone, focus, and the type of adventure that you're wanting to run. Piltover offers a world of innovation, high society, and political intrigue. It's a place where the stakes are often intellectual or moral, and the challenges lie in navigating a city of ambition, wealth, corruption, and knowledge. Whereas Zaun, on the other hand, is a city where the rules are less clear. Survival as a whole is much more immediate and necessary. It's kind of the perfect setting for a campaign filled with gritty, dangerous escapades, morally grey decisions, and a sense of constant struggle against both the environment and rival factions and clans. So, here's some world-building tips for Piltover. The first being emphasize contrast and innovation. Piltover is defined by its elegance and mechanical ingenuity. So because of this, you should highlight the contrast between the opulent upper-tier districts and bustling industrial zones. Every single street and building should evoke a sense of progress with Hextech devices integrated into daily life. It should be an absolute wondrous, beautiful, overwhelming world to navigate through. Should also layer in elements of social stratification, because not everyone in Piltover enjoys its prosperity. Incorporating middle-class workers in a tinkerer's district who may resent the wealthy elite is a perfect implementation method to show the conflict and political misalignment that happens in Piltover. As already alluded to previously, cultural diversity. Piltover is a melting pot of ideas and people, attracting merchants, scholars, adventurers from regions all across Ruterra thanks to the Hex Gates, so represent that throughout the city. And then of course, the most glaringly obvious, political intrigue. The council's decisions ripple across the city and beyond, and people will not like them, even people within the same council. Players might influence or become embroiled in political disputes, with factions lobbying for their own agendas and pushing their own. The potential is so fun and is such an obvious theme to pull on that string. The best and brightest shine in Piltover, but it's important to remember those who shine brightest often burn the fastest. So, would I be completely wrong in saying that the uppity types of Piltover look down on those around them and other regions and have somewhat of a snobbish arrogance about themselves and their capabilities? Obviously not for all residents, but for the more political and elite types, I'd say that's the perfect description of them. Well then, it kinda sounds like the Piltover elite are just the perfect representation of actual League of Legends players. Well, I'll be damned. So now, let's cut over to Piltover's darker, more morally ambiguous brother or cousin or whatever you want to call it, Zaun, or the Undercity. When world building for Zaun, there's a few key areas that jump to front of mind that are probably the easiest starting points and points of emphasis for any GMs out there. The first being an emphasis on chaos and industry. Zaun is a city of gritty, untamed innovation and dangerous experimentation. The contrast in Zaun itself between its squalid lower districts and the high-tech workshops in the upper areas highlights a raw, unrefined version of progress that is not too dissimilar from Piltover itself. Factories spew smoke, steam rises from every corner, and streets are filled with the noise of grinding gears and chaotic creation, because people are creating down here. In Zaun, innovation is messy. It's driven by necessity and desperation rather than the elegance that you'd find in Piltover. The wealthiest and most influential in Zaun are those who have mastered alchemy, shimmer, chemical trade, or gang warfare, whereas those in the depths of the city scramble to survive. Chem barons and crime lords dominate the skyline and streets, while the poor are forced to work in hazardous environments exposed to toxic air and unsafe technology. You do of course have the Firelights, who are a rebellious faction trying to fight for a fairer future within Zaun, but survival often comes at a cost. So from all of this, here are the thematic elements that you need to hit when running sessions or games in the Undercity. Innovation versus ethics. Zaun often treads a line between progress and recklessness. So because of this, your players will probably face moral dilemmas including dangerous experimentation, uncontrolled alchemy, and biochemical creations. The question that they'll need to answer is, unchecked innovation worth the human cost? Of course, as touched on as well, you've got chaos versus order. Zaun's lack of government regulations lead to a world where anarchy reigns supreme. Factions like the Firelights fight for freedom, while others exploit the city's resources for personal gain. Then finally, you've got survival at any cost. Kind of goes without saying. The focus in Zaun and the entire Undercity is survival through whatever means necessary. Success often requires ingenuity, quick thinking, and moral flexibility. And big emphasis on moral flexibility. To me, Zaun is just less technologically advanced cyberpunk in its entire aesthetic, so maybe just steal some quests from that game and reskin them a bit, and it'll work perfectly. So, treading the line between progress and recklessness with an overarching fight between chaos and order and a survival at any cost mentality. I was completely wrong. Zaun is a much better representation of League of Legends players. Look, that's really not the point I was trying to make. So there you have it. Zaun and Piltover, two vastly different cities and communities in the exact same geographical location. It'd be really rude not to tie a nice little bow around this entire thing and homebrew their own unique magic systems, now wouldn't it? So, let's start with what we know about Hextech. To not overcomplicate things, Hextech harnesses raw magical energy using hex crystals or cores, combines these with advanced engineering. In a mechanical sense, I think it makes the most sense that to utilize Hextech, you need to use precise and reliable craftsmanship, so we need to kind of introduce Hextech tools or Tinkerer's tools that kind of function to primarily serve this purpose. In fact, it might be too complicated to introduce Hextech tools as a brand new thing, so let's say to craft Hextech magical items, you need proficiency in Arcane and Tinkerer's tools. Artificers will naturally gain advantage on any Hextech related check because I feel like anyone in Piltover, especially if you're at the academy, will be some form of artificer. So let's say every enhancement you try to make requires a hex crystal, and these crystals should allow for 2 to 3 minor enhancements or 1 major enhancement. If you want to get really granular, we can say these minor enhancements take 2 to 3 days of your time and effort and maybe 100 to 300 gold, whereas the major enhancement should take 1 to 2 in-game weeks and maybe 500 to 2000 goldish. A perfect example of a minor or major enhancement that you might craft is a gravity manipulator. Let's say if it's a minor version of it, once between long rests you can cast the levitate spell, or if it's the major version, once between long rests you can cast the fly spell. From here, a Hextech item in my mind would require attunement, so that way it limits any one player to only using 3 of these enhancements at any given time. Just so I heard you right, I could theoretically craft a gravity manipulator that would allow me to temporarily fly. Yes, but with great power comes, yeah, I know, great responsibility. No, not that. With great power comes the realization that whatever you craft, I'm also going to give to every single other creature and NPC you encounter. So that's Hextech in a nutshell, but then on the opposite end of the spectrum, you've got Shimmer or Chem-tech. Shimmer conceptually is a volatile and incredibly dangerous substance that's derived from Zaunite alchemy that enhances physical and magical abilities at a great personal cost. It does offer great power, but often also causes addictions, mutations, and instability. So naturally, because of the alchemical side of things, rather than using artificer's tools, you should have to use alchemy tools and have proficiency in them. Administering Shimmer or Chem-tech requires no skill at all, but surviving the process demands a high constitution saving throw. And outside some of the more long-form mutations that may take effect, Shimmer effects should last for about up to an hour. That way you have to keep redosing. To add to the negative side of using Shimmer, after every use you'll have to make a wisdom saving throw, set the DC to whatever you want, and failing this causes Shimmer addiction. Shimmer addiction just being that if you don't continuously use Shimmer, you'll have some kind of effects like fatigue or exhaustion. As just touched on, it might make sense to make some form of Shimmer mutation table for some of the more long-form, long-lasting effects, so here's a couple of examples of what you might want to include in that. Some of these are very similar to playing as a mutant that we covered off in the character creation section, but these mutations might take the form of gaining strength to your overall build, but also gaining disadvantage on wisdom saving throws for the duration. You permanently gain an additional melee attack, but every time you use this, you take 1d6 psychic damage. And then the fun of permanently mutating, gaining extra limbs, glowing veins, all of the fun aesthetic and also functional features that might come with that. I'm really struggling to see the downside of Shimmer. Have you not been listening at all? Permanent disfigurement, extra limbs you don't want, addiction, disadvantages. DM, that's exactly how I already build all my characters. Oh yeah, I forgot how messed up you are. So in quick summary, let's cover off some of the benefits and drawbacks of both. Hextech is reliable, versatile, and stable, and has scalable power that you can continue enhancing. It also has the drawback of being entirely dependent on hex crystals, so you can simply remove that to diminish the power of the magical item. Hextech is also reserved for the incredibly intelligent or incredibly capable people of crafting and maintaining it, so it's kind of hard to get your hands on. Shimmer, on the other hand, is incredibly accessible, gives you access to immediate power, and has unpredictable potential, which can be viewed as a good thing. There is of course also the social stigma, the lack of control that is associated with it, and the simple fact that it is addictive and incredibly unstable. I think that's enough learning for now. If it's not already clear, I love this world, and I loved Arcane. I do have thoughts about Season 2, but that's not why we're here. And hopefully, with some of the things that I've covered off on in this video, you feel well equipped enough to go away and run and have your own adventures, and please tell me about them if you do. I want to hear more about this world and people playing in it. As I've said, I am obsessed with this world, and if you'd like me to dive into some of the wider regions of Runeterra, if there's interest in going into the Freljord and Shurima and Noxus, let me know. I have all that knowledge at the front of my mind and I'm ready to overwhelm you with that information, but I want to know that I guess there's vested interest in wanting to hear about it and learning more about the world of Runeterra, League of Legends and Arcane. If you made it this far, thank you for watching, and until next time, insert really memorable quote here that fits perfectly.